The first season of the reboot of She-Ra is now out on Netflix, and this show has been controversial before it even came out. But one thing I want to point out about this show, which I haven't heard anybody else discuss, is in this new version, She-Ra is a lot less powerful, she's a lot less confident, and she is a lot less mature. Now, she is a little bit younger than she used to be. On this show, she is 17 or 18 years old. On the original show, she was 19 years old. I'll talk about that in more detail later on in this video. One way in which the original She-Ra was a lot more powerful than the new version of She-Ra is the new version of She-Ra doesn't have as much control over when she actually becomes She-Ra. In the original, as long as she had her sword, the Sword of Protection, and her sword was fully intact, she could become She-Ra anytime she held her sword in the air and said, "For the honor of Grayskull." There was one episode in which the gem in her sword becomes cracked, and she's not able to become She-Ra. Also, sometimes if she didn't have her sword, or her sword was taken by the enemy, she couldn't become She-Ra. But as long as she had her sword and her sword was fully intact, she could become She-Ra simply by holding it in the air and saying, "For the honor of Grayskull." In the new show, Princess Adora becomes She-Ra in the same way, but a lot of times it just doesn't work. A lot of times she holds her sword in the air and says, "For the honor of Grayskull," but she doesn't transform into She-Ra. Other times she does. It's almost as if the sword itself decides when she should transform into She-Ra or not. We see her trying and failing to transform into She-Ra when she's first learning how to do it in the second episode. But even in later episodes, like in episode 7, she's not able to transform into She-Ra, at least one time when she tries to. Also, unlike the original She-Ra, this version of She-Ra is often forced to go back to being Adora against her will. In the original, She-Ra would only go back to being Adora when she wanted to, or if her sword was damaged, or perhaps if she somehow lost her sword. This new version of She-Ra is actually quite frequently forced to go back to being Adora even when she doesn't want to, and even when she has her sword and there's nothing wrong with her sword. So she has a lot less control over when she is actually She-Ra. Another example of how she is different is she is considerably less self-confident in this new version. In fact, in many times in the new show, she expresses her lack of confidence. For example, she does this in the 4th episode.
"These people expect me to save their land. I thought I was better as She-Ra, but I'm useless no matter what form I take."
That is the kind of lack of self-confidence that she would have never had on the original show in the 1980s. On the original show, she was almost inhumanly confident. She never really had one moment of her life where she lacked confidence in her own abilities. There were times in which she was conflicted about things, but that conflict didn't come from a lack of self-confidence. They also portrayed her as being far more confident than even He-Man, and she was very strong-willed and self-confident whether she was She-Ra or whether she was Adora. In this new version, she is just as lacking in self-confidence when she is She-Ra and when she is Adora. Now, I can understand why they might have wanted to tone down her self-confidence a little bit in this show, because no actual human is totally self-confident all the time. Everyone has moments where they lack self-confidence. But I am surprised that they reduced her confidence as much as they did in this new reboot. Some of her lack of self-confidence could be explained by the fact that she is younger in the reboot than she was in the original. But the truth is, she's actually not that much younger. The new She-Ra reboot doesn't explicitly say how old she is, but the showrunner, Noelle Stevenson, in an interview with TheVerve.com, said that she is around 17 or 18 years old. Noelle also says that it was ambiguous how old she was in the original, but that's not exactly true. We actually do know that she was 19 years old in the original, but the reason we know is due to a small detail that not everybody would know about. The original Filmation version of She-Ra was a spin-off of He-Man, and She-Ra is the twin sister of He-Man, so we know that She-Ra is the same age as He-Man, and on the Filmation version of He-Man, We know that He-Man is 19 years old because there is one episode in which he has a birthday, and on the birthday cake it says he is 19. Therefore, we know that She-Ra is also 19. I will say this, She-Ra behaves in a way that is far more mature than the average 19-year-old. There is no way that you can make the argument that the new version of She-Ra is more mature than the average 17 or 18-year-old. You could even make the argument that she is less mature than the average 17 or 18-year-old. Now, maybe she is and maybe she isn't, but she is definitely not more mature than the average 17 or 18-year-old in this version. She is also a lot more clumsy and goofy in this version. In the original, she wasn't clumsy at all. In this version, she does fall down because of her clumsiness. In the original, if she ever fell down, it would have been because of the actions of the enemy or something like that. She would have never fallen down simply because she was clumsy. Now, again, I realize that actual people are clumsy and actual people do fall down and trip, and they're trying to make her more relatable in this version. It's just, again, I'm a little surprised that they went as far as they did in making her less powerful. She also does a lot more goofy stuff and more childish stuff. For example, she gets involved in a pillow fight in one episode, which is something you didn't see in the original She-Ra. I realize that mature adults might actually get involved in a pillow fight if they're in a particular mood, but this wasn't like that. This scene was more like a bunch of kids getting involved in a pillow fight, even though in reality, She-Ra is only 1 or 2 years younger than she was in the original. In the original version, they really went out of their way to show you what a powerful woman She-Ra was. She was more powerful than anyone else on the show. She was even more powerful than He-Man. They also really went out of their way to show you what a strong personality she had and how strong her willpower was. She was even more strong-willed, like I said, than her brother He-Man. She is also a much more goofy character in the reboot. Now, I will say this. In the original, there were a lot of goofy characters, and there were a lot of goofy moments of comic relief. And some of the characters, for example, Madame Razz, were actually more goofy in the original version than they are in the reboot. That stated, they didn't really make She-Ra a very goofy character in the original. In this one, they do have a lot of moments in which She-Ra acts pretty goofy. Overall, I think what they wanted to do was make She-Ra seem more relatable, and for that reason, they made her a lot less powerful. But I'm not really sure if they succeeded at making her seem more relatable. In the original, she was actually pretty relatable, even though she was very, very powerful. In this, I'm not so sure that she's more relatable than she used to be, but she certainly is a lot less powerful than she used to be. If you want my overall opinion of the She-Ra reboot, I could probably make an entire video on that. In fact, I might. But in a nutshell, I will say this. I don't like the reboot as much as I like the original, but that stated, the last 3 episodes of the first season of the reboot were a big improvement on the first 10 episodes. So for that reason, this show might have potential, especially in future seasons, assuming that it actually gets renewed for more seasons. It will take a little bit for me to get used to this less powerful version of She-Ra, however. So if you like this video, go ahead and give it a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel, click the bell icon for notifications, join the Zork Army, and together we shall take over the world. You can also follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat at ZorkMid123, and I also broadcast on Younow and Twitch under ZorkMid123.